And remembering him today are a couple of young men who were influenced by him. Captain Derek Swenson is with the Moorhead Police Department now, and Sergeant Jessie Grabow is with the Public Information and Department of Public Safety with the Minnesota State Patrol, and a trooper as well. Sergeant Grabow and Captain Swenson, good afternoon, and welcome to KFGO.
Well, hello, and thank you for having us.
It's our pleasure. I was going to talk to Captain Swenson about an upcoming car auction that he's got going on. When I contacted him last week, he said, Dan, I got a better idea. Let's you and I and Jessie sit down and let's talk about Trooper Dave. And I want to give Derek all the credit in the world for wanting to do that. So let's talk about Trooper Dave. Derek, if you don't mind, let's start with you, Captain Derek Swenson with the Moorhead Police Department. Derek, what's your relationship with Trooper Dave? How did you get to know him?
You know, I was a young child growing up in Barnesville and attending Barnesville public schools when Trooper Dave was coming to visit. And I'm a little bit older than Jessie, not a lot, but a little bit. And, you know, I grew up on a farm, so my connection with law enforcement, one of my best friends' dad was a Barnesville police officer, and then Trooper Dave would come into our schools. And I just remember being able to hang on every word that Trooper Dave said, if it was regarding school patrol, if it was regarding, I'm in the generation when seatbelts were first becoming cool to wear, and having him give me a T-shirt because he caught me coming into the parking lot when I was a high schooler wearing my seatbelt and being pointed out to be following that part. And, you know, the real message with that really was, you know, that was a face you could trust. It was a representative of law enforcement, and especially in today's date, we want to start looking at, you know, how important that was back then. This was before we had, you know, school resource officers. This was before we had even DARE in our schools. So he really was one of those people who really broke that, you know, standardized, law enforcement officer just doing enforcement and really making the connection with kids.
Sergeant Jessie Grabow of the Minnesota State Patrol. Jessie, I imagine you have a similar story about how you met Trooper Dave?
Well, yes and no. For me, it's a family thing because my dad and my grandfather were both troopers also, and they worked with Trooper Dave. So it's kind of where it started there. However, like what Officer Swenson mentioned there was the school patrols, and then for me, I can remember when he came and spoke to my driver's ed class, and you know, that's kind of at that age where you're 15 and you think you know it all, and then you get somebody like Trooper Dave there to kind of put you in your place. But he was so respectful and had such a way with words that the way you left there, it's like, okay, I need to pay a little more attention and listen because this guy knows what he's talking about, and it seems like he always left you in better shape than he found you. Sergeant
Jessie Grabow and Captain Derek Swenson of the Moorhead PD. Jessie with the Minnesota State Patrol. Jessie, as long as we're talking to you about that, what did he do to influence you? Did he have an influence as to why you're with the Minnesota State Patrol today?
You know, I think it started right there with driver's ed was a big part of it. I mean, growing up in a family and being a third-generation state trooper, I mean, I knew I wanted to do this, but getting the opportunity years later when the position for the public information, the safety ed position opened up, I went after it. It was, you know, the first person that came to mind was Trooper Dave. I mean, through that, I mean, he wrote the weekly Ask a Trooper articles that show up in the papers all throughout the region, and I think it kind of started there. So, you know, it's just one of those things. Yeah, you hope to do, you know, folks like that some honor in their memory just because of they went before you and you know, kind of set the path for all of us.
And Derek Swenson, who's a captain with the Moorhead Police Department these days. Derek, how did Trooper Dave influence you in your career?
You know, when you think back at how he represented, just like Jessie had said, you know, he represented that uniform with honor, with respect, and he really humanized that badge and being able to make a connection within the community he went to. And as I started my career, that's something I thought about a lot of, you know, how as a child what I thought about is law enforcement. And especially getting into law enforcement, how important it was to make those relationships because not everybody has the same view of law enforcement and not everybody has that same experience personally with law enforcement. So how he would come into a classroom and teach everybody with respect and trying to build those relationships, and not only building those relationships but keeping those relationships was extremely important, and hopefully that's something that all law enforcement will look into.
Captain Derek Swenson of the Moorhead Police Department, Sergeant Jessie Grabow with the Minnesota State Patrol. Joining us today, we're talking about Trooper Dave Bulik, who was from Barnesville but lived in Detroit Lakes his last couple of years. Trooper Dave, wonderful, warm man. My experience with Trooper Dave was as the public information trooper, and I was in Young Man in the Media back in the 80s and early 90s, and Trooper Dave would get a hold of us because he'd have certain things going on. He'd stop by the station. He'd hang out. I remember bringing him into the production studio with me. He just hung around, and we'd go in the production studio. We'd talk. He became so much more than, somebody that you dealt with as a Minnesota State Patrol officer. He was a good friend in his later years. I ended up buying firewood from him out at his place in Minnesota, as a matter of fact. His legacy, his example, he was a superior man, always had time, always wanted to help, always gave others the benefit of the doubt. And from that perspective, just kind of, I know you guys probably don't like to get too personal, especially when you're wearing a uniform and it's a business day today and everything like that. But if you wouldn't mind, I mean, Trooper Dave, it seems to me there's two kinds of ways that you could do your guy's job. Number one is to be suspicious all the time and suspect that person right there of doing something wrong, and you're going to follow him. And then Trooper Dave's way of doing it, which he always seemed to give people the benefit of the doubt. He always felt that they were going about their business. No one was malicious. Can you talk to us a little bit about Trooper Dave's approach and maybe if that's influenced you guys, Jessie?
Well, certainly. I mean, that's just, you hit the nail right on the head talking about Trooper Dave. And that's the person he was. As I mentioned earlier, I think that was always his goal, to leave people in better shape than he found them. And, he's been retired. He'd been retired for over 20 years, and I still run into people that knew him and then that would share stories, and they were just always just pleasant stories or fun stories, and you can tell he made an impact, whether it was through the school patrol or he taught a lot of adult education classes when it came to driving, like the 55 and alive and different things like that. And the man just had a way with words, the way he could get you to, he get you laughing. And I think if you can get people laughing a little bit, you can get them loosen up, you can, help them out a little bit more. And I think that's a big part of it. And I try to bring that into a lot of what I do and maybe who I am. And gotta say, he's definitely had an influence on me.
Captain Derek Swenson with the Moorhead Police Department. Trooper Dave, never mean, always kind and warm, never suspicious. Did that kind of attitude towards law enforcement impact you as you've gone about your business?
He always wore that uniform, and you gave him the respect. I mean, he had that appearance. However, once he started talking, or you got to look into those eyes of his, that you really understood that there was a person behind there. Today's term we would use is that community trust, and really Dave was on the front line of that type of piece. He would go into any situation, and again, looking at that dignity and respect of those people, being approachable and being calm, and again, having that humor like Jessie talked about. And that's really what we want to look at, is humanizing that badge that law enforcement has, a human side to it. And hopefully, as we evolve and progress through our careers, we learn to make sure that human side always comes out.
And guys, when we take a step back from our little place in the world here, where I think we believe people are warmer, better, more approachable, more understanding in this part of the world that we live in, and we have better relationships than just me with a captain with the Moorhead Police Department or me with a sergeant with the Minnesota State Patrol. We're all kind of in this together, and I know we've been hit by outside influences, and law enforcement has been accused of all sorts of things going on nationwide. And when you look at that and some of the things that have been popping out, the thought that Dave always gave people the benefit of the doubt, always had time, always wanted to help. I know that that's the image of law enforcement that I carry with me, with you guys to this day, through his influence. And I know that that's how it really is at both your guys' shops. It's too bad Trooper Dave can't go to bat for us in a PR kind of way right now with what's going on in the world.
It's you hit a lot of things again on the head and whatnot. And Trooper Dave and I, we actually would speak on a weekly basis. He'd call me up and he would just share stories, and he would always, give me laughter, and he'd say, "Hey, I remember the story of working with your grandpa back in the 70s. We had this situation," and it was just always something funny or something like that. And it was nice to hear those things, because I was fortunate. I got to work with my dad the last number of years of his career, but then not, working with grandpa, to hear some of those things and how things were done in a different time and a different generation, but yet how the services always remain the same of to the people, to the public, to protect and serve while you're on patrol, or whether it's through education. That was a big part of it, no doubt.
Captain Swenson, Derek Swenson's with the Moorhead Police Department. Derek, isn't it amazing that to a group of people at a certain age, it's always Trooper Dave. It's not Dave Bulik or whatever his nickname was. It was always Trooper Dave.
Yeah, and that says a lot. I can have people that are in their 50s now, people in their 40s that remember Trooper Dave. And especially when I went through the beginning of my career, and I was lucky enough to work in the schools for 5 years as a DARE officer, and I experience that now with people in their 20s with their own children now that are making me feel old when they come up and say, "Hi, Officer Swenson." But what it's not necessarily that person as much as with Dave, he really was a founder of what we want to have in law enforcement. We want to have throughout our generations and, generations to come, we want to have those officers have that connection with the kids. So as these people are becoming adults, they have that trust. They know what, their Trooper Dave did for them, and what hopefully they can teach even their children about the future Trooper Daves that come down the road. And hopefully we have the ability to keep, officers in those schools to be able to pass that message on and keep that legacy going.
And, guys, I got to say from my perspective, because of, my association with Trooper Dave Bulik and how he conducted himself, that's my image of law enforcement, which is one of those reasons why I was so offended and so put back at some of the things going on nationally these last couple of months. So I don't look at you guys that way. I look at you guys through the lens of Trooper Dave Bulik and what a good person he was, and that you guys are his legacy. And I look at you guys the same way, and I feel bad for anybody out there who can't see it that way. Fellas, want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Captain Derek Swenson of the Moorhead Police Department and Sergeant Jessie Grabow of the Minnesota State Patrol, remembering Trooper Dave Bulik today, who passed away on the 26th at the age of 75 after a 32-year career with the Minnesota State Patrol. Fellas, in Trooper Dave's name, wish you all the best. Keep it safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. KFGO time coming up on 4:54. You're listening to The Drive on the Mighty 790. KFGO.
This is News Radio KFGO. Weather Watch.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm KFGO Chief Meteorologist Tom Szymanski. After a day that featured areas of light snow, light mixed precip, and light rain, depending upon where you were, it'll quiet down for the balance of the week, but temperatures are not going to be anywhere near where they have been in recent past, and we have done something we've never done before. 3 separate days of 70-plus in November. That's amazing when you think about it. Nowhere near that in this forecast. Partly cloudy tonight, 16, west wind 6 to 14. As I look into tomorrow, partly sunny with a high of 34, west wind anywhere from 7